if I was the first woman in 2020 in the Kentucky House to give birth while serving, that means we have not had nearly enough women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s serving.
Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here today with Kentucky State Representative Josie Raymond. Josie, thank you so much for joining us today on What the Fundraising.
Hey there, thank you.
I want to dive into sort of all of your history around sort of your entry into the political world, but I'd love if you just start giving a little background on you and sort of what brings you to this moment in time. I know even in your process of running for office, there were so many personal things, going on. And so I just love for folks to get a sense for who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. The fact that I was invited makes me feel like validated as a fundraiser. So I hope I have something to offer the universe. So I grew up here in Louisville, Kentucky, in the neighborhood that I now represent in the legislature. And I say I grew up in poverty with privilege. I was a free lunch kid here, and that really shaped sort of my life and my career. I got a great education, had some great mentors, had opportunities that many of my peers didn't, recognized that, and so said, I'm going to commit my career and my life to ending poverty in America. That's a big goal. But I feel very strongly about naming that big of a goal, right? And it has guided all of my career decisions and civic decisions along the way. I was not one of those people who was like, I came out of the womb and like started planning my run for president. Those people exist and good for them. I wasn't one. I was a journalist writing about poverty issues. Then I became a teacher through Teach for America. And then I was at college access nonprofits. I've been a student success coach in higher ed. And each of these steps, like doing so much direct service, I thought, I can grant dignity and help individual students and families, but there's the same systemic barriers creating these challenges for them. And so where can I really tackle these systemic challenges? And then it was like, eureka, elected office. And now I've been there 3 years and I joke like, is that really the place? But for now, that is where I'm trying to make my impact on poverty.
Wow. I mean, I think your story is so inspiring. I think especially to the folks who are listening to this, because you share so many similarities with so many of our listeners in your own journey. I actually, I did citizen schools teaching fellowship program. That was one of my sort of first nonprofit roles. And so really I'm also rooted in the education work. There's a lot of overlap in our education work that you've done over the course.
Yeah. And I thought I'm going to be a teacher forever. And then I taught 2 years. My students who were 16-year-old eighth graders were using punctuation for the first time in their lives, which was pretty incredible, but ultimately not going to change the trajectory of their lives. And so that's where I was, again, I'm a really impact hungry person. And so I thought I'm willing to step away from you all to try and find a space where I'm making a greater impact on the world that is shaping you all.
Cool. So, okay. So let's dive into that experience. Like, tell us about your experience running for office. Like, just sort of take us through that journey for a second.
Yeah. So I got this idea in my head, right? And I was moving home to Kentucky I lived in New York and Indianapolis and Oakland, started building my own family, moved home to Louisville where I'm from, started working with young people here, and service felt different here. The kids here felt like me growing up, and I just felt more rooted and got this idea that maybe I could make an impact in elected office. And I thought, well, I've been a teacher. I'm comfortable enough with public speaking. I care deeply about individuals. I think I would be good at that constituent services piece. And I'm just pretty hardcore and focused. And I think I could run a really good campaign. So I felt like I checked enough boxes and said, okay, I'm going to run for office. So I looked around, Congress felt far off to me. I wasn't interested in the challenges at the city council level. And I identified my state representative role in my district, I thought was filled by somebody who was not super connected to our community and was not doing the best that he could for our community. So I thought, that's my race. And I just started learning everything I could about campaigning. Now I know how naive I was. and like, now I know what people were saying behind my back about how crazy I was. Because it is so rare for just a concerned citizen, just a concerned mom to put their name on the ballot.
Mm.
And I think people don't know that. Usually the people who run for office have been connected through a political party, or they're sort of tapped as the next up, chosen by the person who's retiring, these sorts of things. And it's very, very rare for just your average person to say, I'm
Mm.
going to run.
That's amazing. Had there been in your region sort of that, like another person who had been tapped to sort of take over that race, and you were just sort of like didn't realize that that was how things typically worked, and so you were like, all right, I guess it will be me.
No, I started by challenging that incumbent. It was a Democratic primary. I'm a Democrat, and I was running against the incumbent Democrat who'd been there 26 years, since I was a
Mm.
little girl in this district. That, of course, in many places is frowned upon, right? But I was just so hungry to make an
Mm.
impact on the issues that I care about. And, as I went around the city and, met the influential folks and told them my plan, the whole thing, trying to build some support, I heard a lot like, wait your turn, or, well, what
Mm.
if we could talk him into retiring in a couple of years? And I just felt
Mm.
like our challenges are great. Let's not wait. We can't wait.
Mm.
And I thought, I think I can learn what it takes to run a good campaign. There's so many books and seminars and resources, and I'm a member of Leadership for Educational Equity, which is an organization that develops civic leaders. And so I got coaching there, and I really was blinded by my desire to make an impact on poverty
Mm.
in Kentucky, and that made everything else, knocking on thousands of doors, raising a whole lot of money, seem doable or not as scary as they
Mm.
are, when you're just looking at that obstacle.
Okay, so I'm super glad you brought up the fundraising, because I'm curious, like when you were making this decision, and it sounds like, what's so inspiring about your story is that it sounds like really like the decision was just from such a heart-centered place around like, this is the impact I want to make, and not necessarily from like, here's my spreadsheet of all the pros and cons of running for for this seat. But was there anything that sort of came up for you when you thought about, oh my gosh, okay, I'm doing this, around the fundraising component? Any like sort of fears or discomfort or overarching sort of apprehension about that piece of it?
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you receiving that message that it was heart centered. I mean, when I started running, I didn't know what the job of state representative paid. I didn't know any of that. Are there benefits? And it was much, much later when it looked like I would win that a veteran female rep took me aside and took me
Mm.
through the nuts and bolts of it, which I
Mm.
appreciated. Now I try and pay that forward. But no, I grew up, my family wasn't very political, and I didn't know elected officials. I'd never been involved in a campaign. And so I think I had some of that feeling that so many people have about politics of like, this is kind of an icky business. Like, I recognized that like policy is made through politics. So I was willing to
Mhm.
engage in it to get to the policy making space. But I thought, campaigns, there's just so much money flying around, and like, is
Mm.
it dirty money, and what's it all for anyway? Like, and
Mm.
my biggest barrier was maybe really early on when someone said, this campaign's going to cost $100,000. I thought, $100,000. What good could we do in our community with $100,000? And of course, it's not a huge pile of money that's sitting there, and you get to decide whether it's used toward a campaign or, buying a family a home or something like that. And of course, I was much more frugal and learned to do things on my own, and it didn't cost $100,000. But really, I had to learn what it was all about and get comfortable with the idea of, well, the funds that I raise help me spread a message of a more inclusive community, a stronger community, a healthier
Mm.
community, a better educated community, and invite people into the political process who haven't traditionally been involved
Mm.
as donors and as voters. So I had to do some of that work for myself really early on. And then I could get to learning, how do you raise money for a political
Mm.
campaign? Some of the best advice I got very early on from someone who was coaching me in the campaign was make 3 budgets: bronze, silver, and gold. So I did that. And in the campaign, that kind of looks like, okay, the bronze budget is like what I need to not be embarrassed, right? I'm going to send 3 pieces of mail to all the likely
Mm.
voters, and I'll have little cards to hand out when I knock on doors. And that's about it. right? And then the silver was like, oh, you had some yard signs. And then the gold was, okay, we're advertising on Facebook every day. And, all of this. And when I made those budgets and started getting quotes from printers, like really getting in the nitty gritty of it, I saw, oh, I think I can run a good race for $15,000. And then I could create the spreadsheet of how many people do I think will support me in this race? Oh my gosh. When I really get down to it, I think hundreds of people from college, from growing up together, my aunts and uncles, will support me with donations of $25 or $50. And I started to just put those pieces together and see this is doable. This is learnable and this is doable.
Wow. There's something that you said a few minutes ago that I want to go back to because it's something that I've been thinking about so much sort of in preparation for these conversations about political fundraising, which in all transparency is like new to me. I mean, I feel like I'm learning a lot through my interactions with Lee around the differences and similarities between fundraising for political campaigns and for nonprofits. But one of the things you said is around this piece about sort of the cost of the campaign. And I think this belief that we have maybe outside folks like me around that investment of money, that $100,000 or $15,000, whatever it ended up being, is there to either win or lose, right? That like this entire amount, like, because if I think about it from sort of a nonprofit framework, right? We invest in something, a solution or and it either works or it doesn't work. And so when that sort of same mindset gets applied to campaign fundraising, it's like, okay, you either win or you don't win. And so then if I've donated to your campaign and you didn't win, was that just money wasted? But what I think you're saying, or what you were saying, and what I continue to hear from folks is about how much important value is in the campaigning itself. That really, I think from like an investment and a fundraising standpoint is a really important message. Like what you said about how long was your campaign for that from beginning to end?
Oh, I ran about 18 months.
So I think about 18 months of you engaging people in your local community in what's happening around them, educating them on topics, understanding what's really important to them, creating priorities based on, this data you're collecting. I mean, $100,000, in my opinion, is nothing for the amount of like work that you did to bring your community together, right? Like election aside, even. What do you think about that?
Yes. Thank you for that. I felt like I had a lot of education, public education or civic education that I was doing through the campaign. One like initial baseline piece is like your donation to my political campaign, any political campaign, it's not for me. It's not for the candidate. My bank account didn't grow during the campaign. There's more money in my campaign account than there is in my personal account, for sure. But it's not a favor and it's not charity either. It's an investment in the movement of a campaign and the values of the campaign. And I would say, I look to the house to my left, right? And it's a family of 6 Somali Muslim immigrants, right? I look to the family across my cul-de-sac, and this is Louisville, Kentucky, and a lot of people don't think of it this way. There's 4 generations of Bhutanese refugees across my cul-de-sac. And I think, aren't these people worth the investment, right, of receiving the piece of mail, of being invited into the political process, of saying, I would be honored if you would cast your first vote as a new American citizen for me. But if I lost, if any candidate loses, the money that was invested in that campaign, I don't consider wasted, right? When I was knocking on doors, so many people would say, you're the first candidate to ever knock on my door. And I would think, well, you deserve that and you're worth that. And that's free, of course, to walk on someone's porch and knock on their door. And then you're going to need about 8 cents to hand them that little card with a picture of them. So I invited people in, right? We had conversations. People felt heard for the first time. People wanted to yell at me and like, okay, I'll give you that experience. I was able to hold the incumbent that I was challenging accountable in a way that he hadn't been for years and years. I was able to raise issues. My top legislative priority is early childhood education and expanding access to pre-K in Kentucky. And that was not in the conversation. And all of a sudden it's, a topic in the debate that folks are watching. Even though my opponent and I were in the same political party, we were asked the top issue in our district. And he said traffic and I said hunger. So those are two very different visions. And so I had gotten to that place that I think all candidates have to get to, which is like, why is it okay if I run and lose? And what good can come out of it? And you can share that message with donors as well, that you're investing in an experience and a movement and a community building effort that's strengthening our democracy and setting the stage for more people to engage in the political process going forward as voters, donors, and candidates.
So I love that. And I couldn't agree more. And I actually think it's a lesson for nonprofits as well around transparency when you're trying new things or putting yourself out there to test a new solution to a problem. Like just the conversation around all the value created in between how we typically define like success in our culture, culture being America as a massive umbrella statement there. But so tell me about that piece. So what you just said about you can talk to your donors about this. Did you have that level of transparency with your donors around like at the beginning, maybe before you thought that you or knew that you were going to win, like where you were sort of sharing with them, look, this isn't about whether or not I win or lose this election. It's about my role in having these issues heard and holding, this person accountable.
Yes. So, that was the pitch early on, especially when the race did not look favorable. There was a lot of transparency, like concrete and more theoretical. I remember a fundraising email I put out that said yard signs cost $6.36. You're so used to seeing them everywhere. And I just want you to know, like, this is what they cost and this is why I'm asking. And, we got, the more concrete I was, the more donations we would get digitally, at least. But no, I would say, I'm campaigning on early childhood education. When's the last time you heard about that? Especially from this candidate? Never, right? And so there would be people who say, you know what, I want to hear that debate being had, and so I'll invest in that. And then as we were, sharing messaging or doing social media, I would do selfies with people at the door and say, here's Susan, she's on oxygen and she's 78, and she just told me no one's ever knocked before, and for people who are invested in building and strengthening our democracy, I think that was valuable enough to kick in again, right? To 10 or 15 or $20 to keep me going.
I love that. I do want to ask, you had mentioned that the money that you're raising wasn't going to you personally. So how do folks who are running for office sort of survive personally? Like, are they paid anything by their campaign? Do they need to have another job at the same time? How are folks making that work?
Oh, it really varies, right? There's, I don't know, 100,000 elected positions across the country, something like this. For the state legislature in Kentucky, we're a part-time legislature. So I'm in our capital, Frankfort, January through March each year, and then a couple days a month the rest of the year. So I was working full-time at a university, coaching students who had barriers to graduation. And I used up my vacation days. I would take a day every month to go and knock on doors during the day to try and catch retirees who were at home, and then I would also knock on doors in the evenings a couple days a week. I used up my vacation days. It was really challenging. And, if a reporter would call, I wanted to call right back and get the newspaper, but I had a student in front of me who needed counseling, on how to pay for their next semester. So it's a hard balance. And that's why you see in legislatures and city councils and Congress, especially, very wealthy people serving for the most part, retirees, lawyers in private practice, successful entrepreneurs. There are very few elected officials who have a day job. And that's something we need to continue to lift up and name and do whatever we can to break down barriers. It's like poisonous to propose legislation to pay yourself more, right? And I haven't done it. But there are some really good conversations going on across the country about, should legislatures, for example, be a full-time position with a living wage that allows people to focus just on that. They'll be more effective, and it will allow single parents in, in ways that they aren't now. It will allow young people in. It will allow people with student debt. It will allow hourly workers and low wage workers in. And those are voices that are missing from these spaces. And when voices are missing from the policymaking spaces, you see them left out of meaningful policy.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I'm going to ask this from a very ignorant place, but could you have paid yourself from your budget, from your campaign budget, or is that not allowed?
So that's not allowed unless you're running for Congress. When you're running for Congress, you can do that. And there's some rule about you're allowed to pay yourself like your previous salary or the congressional salary, whichever's lower. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez paid herself from her campaign fund, which was a very big fund. And she's been very open that she was low wage when she was running. For the most part, people who run for Congress are not taking advantage of that provision because they don't need to. But no, people who are running for local office or state office need to be working a day job or have a spouse who can support them, which is one reason why you don't see single people doing it as often. It's very challenging. You need to have a lot go right in your life to be in a place where you can run for office these days.
Wow. Yeah, that is really sad, honestly. But when we think about how to fix some of the biggest systemic problems and think about how to have more representation in these elected offices, especially because folks are typically not going straight to congressional races, right? Like they're starting in some of these smaller, more localized races. And so if they don't have the sort of financial capacity or sort of family structure to support them winning locally, then that seems like a really hard barrier to get over.
Right. You'll hear personal stories and lived experience is so important in policymaking spaces. And so like in the Kentucky legislature, you'll often hear, I share I was a free lunch kid, or people who talk about they received food stamps or other assistance, but it's always past tense. Right, because we were able to get to a stable place where we could run for office. We have one renter in the Kentucky legislature out of 138 members. We have one renter. So that's an outsized burden on that representative to speak for the hundreds of thousands of renters we have in Kentucky because they're not able to be there and share their experience. I'm so passionate about women in particular in their 20s, 30s, and 40s entering local and state elected office because that's where you get that bench, that pipeline. If you want to see female governors and female Congress people, of which there are too few, people need opportunities to enter at lower levels earlier. And too many women are locked out right now, systemically locked out. I will make one point. You can't pay yourself if you're running for an office below Congress. But I followed the lead of women across the country during my campaign in 2018 and asked my state election finance office for approval to use campaign funds for childcare. This was sort of a nationwide movement. I got approval here in Kentucky. Other women have been successful in other states, and some other women have been unsuccessful in some other states. But this is a movement now to put this into statute nationwide, to say that campaign funds can be used for childcare. And that's one of the structural barriers that we're trying to break down that will allow more moms of young children in particular to run and win.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting to hear that's happening. And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what's it like being a mama with little ones doing this work? I know, I think you ran your campaign when your second was really young, right?
Yes. So when I first ran, my kids were 3 and 1. And now my husband and I look at pictures from the campaign trail and we just think, what were we doing? And, the baby starts screaming during an event. My husband will sort of whisk him away. Another reason why 2-parent families are advantaged in this area. I was so blinded, right, by thinking of the impact that I could make in this office that I thought our family can make this work. And we did, but not without struggles. And now serving, I miss baseball games. I miss bedtime. I miss dinner time. Now my kids are 7, 6, and 1. But to see the civic engagement that they have, that their knowledge base, their interest in current events and politics, and really the agency that they feel and what they see their mom doing, it means so much to me that it's worth it. I was the first Kentucky representative to give birth in office. That happened in 2020. And I took my baby when she was just a few weeks old on the floor, and I was giving a speech about women's health care. And the feedback from that was really powerful. People weren't used to seeing that. It meant a lot to a lot of people here, and that meant a lot to me. But really, if I was the first woman in 2020 in the Kentucky House to give birth while serving, that means we have not had nearly enough women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s serving. But when you run and you start to see when you represent something more than yourself, and it's a pretty overwhelming feeling. When I first ran, we saw voter turnout go up amongst women in their 30s. So that representation piece is powerful. And so that was, a white mom in her 30s, which you don't think of as a really unique identity. In political spaces it is, but it speaks to how we need every identity out there so people feel seen and invited into the process.
I love that. And my right-hand woman over here in my business, Allison, ran for mayor of her town with her little one strapped to her. You look at, I don't even know how old she was, maybe 6 weeks. And you look at all of her campaigning pictures and there's just baby little legs sticking out. And I loved it so much.
For these kids. They're going to love to have these.
Yeah. And just what a important, I think, message it sends to so many people. Yes, both other women in their 30s. And I'm so glad to hear that about the voter turnout. But I just think in general, sort of humanizing, us in all of our roles, right? And just being able to give space for both to be that mama for your little one and also out there representing women on the floor and their healthcare needs. And so I think that's just so inspiring. So what do we do about this pay issue? Feels like a huge hurdle. What can, someone who's listening to this right now, who's maybe activated the way that I am around, making it more financially accessible for folks to run without having the very personal network to support them. What can we as a society do to shift this landscape?
Long pause. More of us have to run. More of us have to go through the really grueling experience of being the first or the second or the third until we get the critical mass that we need to change the policy. We can be more public about it. I'll say, as often as I can, or post online as often as I can. The salary for Kentucky State Legislature is $188.22 a day, right? Because people have no idea. They think we make a ton of money, or they think we make absolutely no money. And so it's shining light on it. And of course, that number is there's 50 different numbers in 50 different states. So I think that civic education piece is huge. The working toward the critical mass. I know I'm asking women to do something really challenging, but I am. I just am. I say we didn't make this mess, but the moms need to clean it up, which is a very familiar feeling. And then 2021 America, that's just where we're at. I think transparency is valuable. I'm thinking of, if there were a woman who launched her campaign today, I'd want her to say, here's my annual salary. Here's what it costs to run this race. Here's what everything costs. I'd like to use this provision where I can use campaign funds for childcare, and invite existing political donors and people in her circles that she's going to activate to become political donors. Do you want to invest in this different type of voice? And I think that's going to be exciting for people. We've seen record numbers of women elected in the last several years. And that's the headline. It's always a record number. Then you get to and we're still at 25% women, or whatever it is. Congress, I want to name that Congress is made up of 6% mothers of young children. There's more Congress people who are prosecutors than mothers of young children. There are more Congress people who were born outside the United States than there are mothers of young children. So we're vastly underrepresented, but I think it's an opportunity to name these barriers and say, and I am one voice out of hundreds or thousands who are actively working to overcome it, but it's going to take a critical mass. And that's where we are. I wish everything were easier, but it's a tough moment. I want to reiterate, though, that there are networks of support and that every piece of it is teachable, trainable, learnable, doable for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing you're also saying, which is really resonating with me, is just sort of this constant need to keep the short game and the long game in mind at the same time. I think from an outside perspective, so much of what we see when we see people fundraising in political spaces, at least what I feel like I see, maybe the one of 200 emails I open, is like there's so much urgency, right? Like, I don't remember the last time I read a fundraising email that had sort of a long game message to it, right? It's like a lot of what we see is like this, like, your donation will be 10x today. And if we don't get it by midnight, then like, blah. Um, and this like real high, like urgency activation. And I think what you're saying that's actually super important is like that, if that alone is how we view decisions to run for office or to invest in these campaigns, we're going to burn out on that message fast. And there's a long game here around what it takes to sort of change the status quo in these different spaces that's actually going to allow us to sort of shift the tides and create more space and enough momentum around these issues. Am I like hearing that right?
You put it well. That's the message I'm sending out into the universe. This is my hypothesis. I need some people to go and do it and report back. I mean, it's what I'm doing here in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's working for me. No, it's so funny you said that about the emails. I was just writing down to ask you the question, because the only thing that makes me doubt this sort of pure vision is that I get the same emails, right? If we don't raise $4,367 by midnight, like the sky falls. And we know that's fake. It's so fake. And that doesn't work for me. But here's my question. Does it work? Because everyone keeps doing it. So I think, well, gosh, it must work. But I say, I feel so strongly about it that I'll never do it. I'll never do it because it's fraudulent. If that's the end of my political career, that's it.
Okay, well, I'm really glad you said that because, well, first of all, I don't have the data, and I can actually look maybe after this call and interject it or put it in the show notes if I can find some interesting data here around this. But what's super interesting about political fundraising to me is it actually breaks all the rules of nonprofit fundraising. I mean, you would never treat donors in nonprofit fundraising the way that people who give to political campaigns are treated in terms of like selling lists to other people. I'm like, I don't even know who you are. How did you get my email address? Oh, someone I gave to sold the list. If a nonprofit did that, they would get dragged so bad. Like, that is a big no-no. The other thing is like around how much you're asking for money. It breaks every rule in the book around the sort of level or the relationship between kind of cultivation emails, emails that are just about having your audience become more problem aware or helping your audience feel a sense of belonging and community and like all these things. We spend all year doing this in our organizations to send out 4 to 10 asks a year, maybe, right? And like, I have nonprofit clients that are like, you want me to send 2 emails in 1 week? And like, one of them, the ask is actually pretty buried. Like, after a big long story.
It's like 6 a day.
Yeah. It's wild. It's wild.
On congressional, like on U.S. Senate campaigns. It's like 6 a day, not at the local level.
Right. But so to me, first of all, I'm super happy to hear that that isn't your strategy and that there's a way to win and a way to raise money not doing it that way. Because my guess is that a lot of people, especially if they come from a nonprofit fundraising background, like they're not going to want to fundraise that way. It does not feel in line with who they want to be as a fundraiser. And so like my perception would be like, oh, I wouldn't do that either. I would never do that. And so then I think this question of like, well, is that the only way to raise money comes up? And I just think that's impossible. I mean, I don't have the data to support it, but everything we know about human behavior, connection, belonging, I mean, especially when it comes to recurring giving, I mean, I think some data that would be super interesting to look at is like how that type of fundraising, how political fundraising works in year 1. And then what happens if the candidate doesn't win in terms of the repetition of folks giving in the next campaign cycle versus someone who fundraises more like a nonprofit, more with the sort of like long game, deeper relationship building in mind. My guess would be that over the lifetime of the candidates like races, the giving would be much, much, much higher taking the nonprofit model. But it might not be higher in year one.
Right. But it does, the kind of political fundraising we're talking about, which is a national form of fundraising, right? If you're like in a special election for a Georgia Senate seat, right?
That kind.
Treating donors as disposable, right? Like you'll burn that bridge if you can get that $20. And that doesn't feel good to us. And you know what? Maybe it didn't feel good to those candidates who did it, but it felt necessary at the time. We're talking mostly about email, right? But the way most candidates at all levels, presidential down to your school board, the way that most candidates raise most of their money is call time, right? Or dialing for dollars. It's not email, right? So you'll sit down in a chunk. Now, I don't know if nonprofits do this at all. I doubt it, right? So you're supposed to calendar time 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. You sit down, you have a call list in front of you. You call, Mallory, how have you been? How's the baby? I have an exciting announcement. I'm running for state representative. You know, I know we share the same concerns. You know, will you donate $250 to my campaign? Like, pause, like sit, right? And so when I talk to candidates, I want to name this and like normalize it, right? Like Barack Obama did this, right? So you can do it for school board, but that's how most of the fundraising is done. Much more effective than email, but uncomfortable for folks. I remember I broke all the rules around it, because you're supposed to have dedicated time on your calendar and sit down and have someone staff you, have someone sit with you. As soon as you get the commitment, you hand them the phone to take the credit card number, right? Because you're dialing the next number. I had little kids, so I did my call time on the way to and from daycare in the mornings and afternoons, right? And then if I had to write something down, I grabbed like a diaper from the passenger seat and scribbled it down. So that's how I did it. I remember I called my uncle Lee, who I never called before and I've never called since, and he thought someone had died. Like he saw my name pop up on the phone and was like, Josie, what's wrong? I was like, oh, nothing. I just need $500. So I mean, so that's different than nonprofit fundraising, I imagine.
We do that. There's some of that. There's some of the like cold calling. But what's really interesting is that I would say that those effectiveness numbers are sort of switched from a email perspective and a call perspective. So perhaps it is this sort of relentless emailing that is actually decreasing the effectiveness of those emails over time, right? The prompt has sort of I do a lot of work around habit building and behavior change. And we think about the moment that a person is going to take action, there has to be a certain sort of combination of how motivated the person is to take action and how easy the action is to take. And then sort of making sure that the prompt falls above the action line, right? There's enough of each, the prompt falls above the action line. The thing is like my guess is that when folks are emailing that frequently, the prompt doesn't work, because the moment your folks stop opening your emails because they're all the same, the prompt is wasted.
So then you know what you do? You just buy more. You just buy another list.
From the other person I gave to, right? And that's how I end up on all these lists.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so it sounds weird to you and me. You know, we'll both have to go and find like someone who worked on a president email fundraising team and find out why they do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's really interesting here is like, and not to be judgmental and say like this thing is bad, but just to recognize, I think for nonprofit folks who are listening to this, who are like, I might be interested in running for office one day, but I don't want to have to do it that way. I think it's really interesting to hear your story and that that's how you have felt too. And that there is another way to show up and to fundraise. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, right? Depending if you have sort of an uncle to call or not, right? And so I just want folks to recognize that just like with fundraising for a nonprofit, really making like aligning it with who you are as a fundraiser and as a nonprofit leader, that's critically important if you're running for office too.
Yeah. campaigns and campaign strategies are always evolving, right? There's best practices, but maybe you remember growing up like I do, like candidates used to give out nail files
Mm.
with their logos and stuff on them. If nobody does that anymore, right? Was it really effective then? Would it be really effective now? Like, why did that practice fall off? So things are always evolving and changing. A couple of years ago, I remember everyone said like mail is dead. Political mailers are dead, right? You need to put all your money in digital. And then Facebook changed its ad mechanism, who can follow. And then everybody was in quarantine and it was like, mail's the future. Everyone's dying to get their mail every day. So everything's always changing and it's so ripe for innovation and new strategies and like authentic connection, like everything,
Yes.
right? People I think are hungrier than ever for authentic connection or reconnection. And the skills are so transferable. We're talking about differences between nonprofit fundraising and political fundraising, but like making the case and making the ask are so transferable. And especially when you're thinking about political spaces, making the ask is the most important skill because you start out making the ask for dollars. And that enables you to get, your cards printed with your picture of you and your dog. And then you're using those to make the ask for the vote. And then hopefully you're elected. And then you're asking your colleagues, you're making the ask to your colleagues to co-sponsor your bill. And then you're in a hearing and you're making the ask for people to support, the testimony they're hearing about this new policy. And so especially people who have been making asks, make a few more and join me in the policymaking space. We need some help.
I love that because I think what you're reminding us all of is that fundraising is just one other form of advocacy. And I think because of like so many of the stigmas and taboos around money, it tends to be a form of advocacy that we get even more uncomfortable about. Like I've heard from so many fundraisers, I can go into a space and advocate for my program, my organization to partner with blank. But like the moment I have to say that comes with a financial commitment, like my whole stomach drops, right? Like I'm so scared. And that's related to so many beliefs that we hold about money and value and investment and charity and sort of all these like old school belief systems. And so I think what's so important about what you're saying is that like money is a mechanism, is a tool to create change. It's one of the tools to create change. And you advocate for it in the same way you're advocating for these other things.
To spread your message, right? And to invite people into this process, to invite people to make their voices heard, to invest in their neighbors and their communities and the values that they believe in. I always think about some other advice I got very early on. Someone said, how does it feel to ask for money? And I was like, ooh, blah, blah, right? And then they said, how does it feel to give money? And I was like, amazing. I feel so good, right? To help someone or invest in something you believe in. And if we can just get people who are thinking about entering, the public sphere to flip that switch like I did, people are going to feel really good to invest in you and the cause that you're advocating for.
I could not agree more. And I think I'm so glad you said that because I think for women in particular who do want to do heart-centered work or trying to make a positive impact, they have so many. I mean, we all do biologically have caretaker, harmonizer tendencies, right? And so we don't want to rock boats. We don't want to be in situations where we might do something that will make someone not like us. Like it activates all of our like community. And so I think those mindset shifts around like our first sort of go to when the fear of fundraising comes up is like, we're doing that. Like they're going to be mad at me for asking. My friends might not invite me to parties anymore because they always talk about my nonprofit, like all these things. And then we think about what it feels like when our friends talk to us about something that's so important to them. And when we're able to support their work and how good that feels. And so I think there's so much here, both in terms of women getting involved in civic leadership in order to cause a big tidal wave on some of these issues, and also what happens inside us when we become embodied in our message and advocating for the things we believe in and the way we change as women in those moments. I think for me, that's been so transformational. And I think you model that so much.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm thinking of it. It makes me feel alive when I see someone else feeling alive, right? Advocating for a cause, and just makes me say like, hell yeah, I'm all in. Let's do this. What's up next?
Okay. How can people find you? And usually I invite folks at the end of these episodes to shout out a nonprofit that they love if they want to highlight so people can check out and give. Or if there's another candidate you want to highlight and shout out, or like, what's the action? What's the call to action right now?
Well, you can find me at josieraymond.com or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Rep Josie Raymond. I would love for people to follow along. Whether you're in Kentucky or not, you might find it interesting what we've got going on in Kentucky politics.
Okay, why don't we send folks off with an invitation to find out who your state representative is?
Yes.
I bet you people don't even know that. And even like the issues that they ran on. I feel like that would be eye-opening for folks.
Great idea. And let me tell you, there's not a centralized place to do that.
Okay. So Google.
Let me check something right now. I think this is going to be our best bet. I don't want to make a bad recommendation. Okay. What I'd encourage everybody to do is go to runforoffice.org. Whether you're thinking about running or not, you type in your address. It shows you the list of positions, elected offices in your area. And this is a great place to start finding out who your state representative is, who your state senator is, who your city council person is, your sheriff, your jailer, your coroner might be elected. See who's elected in your area, who they are. Then you can get to their website, their Facebook page, their legislative page, and learn more about who they are, what they're bringing to the role, and what they campaigned on. And if you see things that bother you, if you think you could do a better job, let me know. josieraymond.com. We'll talk about it.
I love it. I love it. And for everyone listening too, I really want to encourage some additional dialogue around the importance of investment in political campaigns far beyond whether or not the candidate is winning or losing. We'll talk in some of these other episodes about how many times it typically takes. You have been the unicorn, right? But it typically takes before someone wins a seat, and why it's just so important for all the things we said in terms of getting different issues to the top of people's conscious mind and added to holding other elected officials accountable. There's so many important components to supporting politicians who are running on the values and action items that you believe in. So thank you, Josie, for joining me today and having this conversation.
Thanks for having me. There's literature that says that people, women especially, have to be asked to run for office 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times. And so for everybody out there, I'm asking you.
Here's your first time, or maybe your second.
First ask, or maybe ask a couple times, and this is that tipping point. And if that's not right for you, I'd say give $5 to a candidate in your area, see what it feels like, and see what kind of response you get. It's going to mean a whole lot to that person, and it's going to involve you in a process that maybe you've not been involved in before, and I guarantee you're going to feel more invested in elected politics in your community.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.